New video has been released showing police officers peacefully escorting protesters into the Capitol building, calling into question the narrative that there was a violent insurrection. Speaker Mike Johnson has started releasing the 44,000 hours of tapes previously withheld. So if you remember, these tapes were given to Tucker Carlson back in February by then Speaker Kevin McCarthy, but they weren't released to the public because of security concerns, they said. But now Speaker Johnson has ignored the warnings from mostly Democrat establishment Republicans and those in charge of security for the Capitol, and he's decided to release the footage to the public. So what he's going to do is slowly be publishing the footage onto a website, but in the meantime, people can go in person to DC and go through the footage in private screening rooms. So they apparently don't want the footage getting anywhere just yet until they look through all the footage and make sure that there aren't any real security concerns. But he promises he's going to be releasing all of this. And most likely the people right now in those screening rooms looking through the footage are probably journalists from various outlets. They're probably already there doing that. Let's go over some of the footage. You see some of the footage here. This is, there's the police just standing there. You know, people are coming in and out of the building. You've got police just standing around in the halls, directing people, even answering questions, patting them on the back. They're just standing around while the people are going in and out of the Capitol building. So clearly this doesn't look like an insurrection. And here's the police even kind of leading them through. Look at those cops just standing there chit-chatting, gossiping about whatever it is while these people are walking through the Capitol. So this, of course, calls into the narrative that this was ever a violent insurrection, because that is what we have been told. This is a violent insurrection. People have gone to jail for this. Some people for decades have been sentenced to 22 years in jail. Enrique Tarrio, one of the Proud Boys, wasn't even in D.C., wasn't even here at the Capitol, wasn't even in D.C., but gets convicted of insurrection, of plotting and planning this obviously violent insurrection that you can see happening here. I want to go to this video here and focus in on the guy in the red shirt. That guy right there walking with that red shirt. That is Matthew Perna. Matthew ended up committing suicide. He was charged with, he did plead guilty initially to charges for going into the Capitol, trespassing. They told him that he would get about a year in prison, but then what they did was they added on a terrorism enhancement to his charge, and that was going to result in 9 years in prison. And at that point, he could not take it, and he ended up killing himself. All for this. Look at him in that red sweatshirt. There he is, just walking with a camera, not committing a violent insurrection, at least not in this footage. This has destroyed a lot of lives. There are a lot of people who have now charges on their record, convictions on their record. Some people are sitting in prison for years. As I mentioned, Enrique Tarrio, 22 years in prison for plotting and planning an insurrection that clearly didn't really look like an insurrection. I mean, certainly some aspects of it became violent. Certainly there was harm, violence. This happens in protests, but to call it a plot, a plan, an insurrection that went all the way up to the very top. They're claiming that the president of the United States at the time was in on this insurrection, was in on this planning and plotting. The fabrications, the lies that are being told to us and that we're being forced to believe with very limited evidence. And the fact that they didn't release this evidence, not only to the public, but they didn't release this, from my understanding, to even the defendants. The people who were charged couldn't even get access to this video in order to defend themselves. So you can believe that with this footage coming out, there probably will be a lot of people who will be wanting to get their sentences reversed. They'll be appealing the charges against them, as they should if this video exonerates them. I want to take a look at this other video. This is the police taking the handcuffs off of a guy and then giving him a fist bump to this violent insurrectionist. So here's this guy here. They're going to take off the handcuffs. For what reason? I don't know. He's still there. Why are they taking off the handcuffs? Why wouldn't they just cart him away, I guess? Oh, here's the fist bump. Yeah, man. So this is obviously causing people to question, who is that person? Is that person working with, was he a Fed, a human informant of some kind? Who is that person that was giving a fist bump? Could be just a guy who he's glad to get the handcuffs off and gave him a fist bump. I mean, it's possible that it means nothing, but it's also possible it means something. And that's why there needs to be further investigation. There are some investigations being called of the January 6th committee, the commission that included Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney. People are calling for an investigation into that investigation, investigate the people who were supposed to be investigating what happened during January 6th and who then came out saying this was a violent insurrection and we have to go and throw people in jail and stop our political opponents, the never-Trumpers. So there is an investigation into that. Again, not really sure where that's going to lead. They're probably not going to find some conspiracy where somebody took bribery money in order to say that this was a violent insurrection. Clearly, these people were ideological. They had an ideological desire to stop Trump, an ideological desire to stop MAGA, to stop these people who support Donald Trump, to label them terrorists, to label the entire movement terrorist so that they could stop it dead in its tracks. So I don't think we're going to find in an investigation of the January 6th committee, I don't think we're going to find any sort of bribery or dark money or something along those lines. It's just ideological. But this is why this type of ideology needs checks and balances. This is why it's so dangerous. When clearly the footage shows to any of us who are independent, who didn't have any skin in the game either way, who are not MAGA, but are not never-Trumpers, saw what happened on January 6th and thought, this is a protest that went awry. This is a protest that went too far. Seen many. Black Lives Matter protests were also protests that went too far. And that was a scandal because most of the mainstream media was standing there saying, as they were standing in front of burning buildings and smashed up cars and smashed up buildings, saying these are peaceful protests, when clearly there had been violence at these protests. That too was a gaslighting attempt and a scandal. You can't lie to us. We're seeing with our own eyes what's happening here. So you're trying to gaslight us into believing that these protests were peaceful when clearly areas of cities were burning and smashed up. That is a fact. Just like looking at January 6th, it's a fact when you look through this footage that many of these people were just sightseeing through the Capitol. They'd never been there. They thought they were allowed. The police were escorting them around. The people in these lines, in these groups, many of them believed they were allowed to be there. They figured it's the government. It's a government building. We're citizens of the United States. We pay for these buildings. We pay for the salaries of the people who work in these buildings. We're allowed to be in these buildings. And then they get charged. They get charged, their lives are ruined, and some of them, unfortunately, commit suicide, which is just really totally tragic. Now, this video was actually released prior to the latest dump of video that is being released by Speaker Johnson, but I think it's important to look at anyway. This is the police and how they handled the crowd, because there was a lot of, the crowd was violent, it was an insurrection, right? But much of the crowd was peaceful, and then the police actually were the ones who started the violence. Take a look at this.
I have given warnings about chemical munitions. I need the less than lethal team positioned above me to start deploying. Launch! 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 You're on the wrong side of history! Hey, walk up to the front of the fucking line. Come here. Yeah, show these cops what they just did to you. You gotta turn around. We need more munitions. Let's go. Shoot it. Go. Shoot. Shoot. Hey, put it down, douchebag. Put it down, douchebag.
ugly. And our officers on the line did what they needed to do at the time.
Chucking grenades at us.
If they'd never thrown the concussion grenades, if they'd never used a pepper spray, this wouldn't have happened. It was a peaceful protest. I was standing within 15 feet of the line of officers. They started firing at us before anybody did anything to them. We were not rushing them. There was no advance on them. They just started throwing concussion grenades and pepper spray.
So there you go. As you saw in that footage, a lot of people were there just with their cell phones filming things, and suddenly they would end up with something thrown at them, targeted by the police. There weren't these people were not rioting or causing problems or needing to be contained in this way, but the cops were causing a lot of the violence, and that has led a lot of people to question what really happened that day and who was involved. I want to show you. This is Mike Lee. He's actually tweeted this out. So he's been questioning a lot about whether or not feds were involved. There's a lot of people wondering if there were feds involved who were trying to incite violence or trying to rile people up in order to get, root out the extremists, root out the terrorists. And so maybe the feds were there trying to do that, or maybe they were there because they were trying to ultimately get Trump out of office. But here's Mike Lee. He's talking to Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney has been responding to this footage coming out, and she says, well, here's some of the January 6th video for you. And she's showing some of the violence, and there was violence that happened. But again, many people say, well, there wasn't violence until the cops started it. Mike Lee then says, Liz, we've seen footage like that a million times. You've made sure we saw that and nothing else. It's the other stuff, what you deliberately hid from us, that we find so upsetting. Nice try. P.S. How many of these guys are feds? As if you'd ever tell us. Here's Louisiana Rep. Clay Higgins. This is a questioning he did a year ago of FBI Director Christopher Wray, asking if there were FBI actors involved. Watch this.
Does the FBI have confidential human sources? Did the FBI have confidential human sources embedded within the January 6th protesters on January 6th of 2021?
Well, Congressman, as I'm sure you can appreciate, I have to be very careful about what I can say about when.
Even now, because that's what you told us 2 years ago.
May I finish? About when we do and do not, and where we have and have not used confidential human sources. But to the extent that there's a suggestion, for example, that the FBI's confidential human sources or FBI employees in some way instigated or orchestrated January 6th, that's categorically false.
Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol on January the 6th prior to the doors being open?
Again, I had to be very careful.
It should be a no. Can you not tell the American people, no, we did not have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters positioned inside the Capitol?
Gentleman's time has expired.
You should not read anything into my decision not to share information.
Director Wray,
confidential human
gentleman's
sources.
time has expired.
So unwilling there to answer that question, not giving a yes or a no. And I think that Representative Higgins was right. You should be able to say no to that. Should be pretty simple, but maybe the answer isn't so simple. Maybe there was something else going on there. And so that has led to a lot more questioning of what actually happened. Who was involved? Who were these players? There's a lot of people that are pointed out in January 6th that people want some answers about. And, ultimately, I think what this boils down to is there was a clear agenda when Trump became president of the United States. There was a clear agenda to do whatever they could to undermine his presidency, to halt him. There were letters that were printed in mainstream media. People hailed them as heroes. People who wrote anonymous letters saying that they were basically undermining the president, taking things off of his desk, ensuring that his plans did not go through. There was a concerted effort inside the government to halt the presidency of Donald Trump. Whether you voted for this guy or not, I didn't. I didn't vote for Donald Trump, but I'm disgusted by how I've seen people behave when it comes to what should be our democracy. This should be a democratic. Look, you only have to put up with somebody for 4 years, 8 at most if you don't like them, if you're not the one who voted for them. That's the way it works. And then you have to hope that next time your guy gets in. That's how democracies are supposed to be. But instead, we watch this concerted effort to get rid of Donald Trump, and it's still happening to this day. Still, they're going after him in court battle after court battle. Luckily, the Colorado court case that was against Donald Trump, trying to get his name off the ballot, there was a push to say that he incited an insurrection on January 6th, and because of that insurrection, he was disqualified from being possibly being president of the United States or any election or any official in any elected capacity, actually. Luckily, the Colorado courts just a few days ago ruled that he can be on the ballot, that he will be on the ballot. And so we will see his name in Colorado. This would have set a terrible precedent had Colorado succeeded, had the people that were pushing to get his name removed, had they succeeded. This would have caused a ripple effect amongst many states in the union, which would have then tried the same tactics. But it didn't work. He will be on the ballot. And once again, it's just another attempt to thwart democracy, another attempt to ensure Donald Trump doesn't end up in power again. And that's what January 6th is really all about. These people are political. Many of them committed obvious crimes. So if you commit a crime, if you trespass, if you break property, then you should serve time for that. If you've committed any sort of crime, then there is a punishment that goes along with it. Many of these people are seeing enhancements to their punishment, or just even fully fabricated enhancements like, hey, you helped plot and plan an insurrection that didn't happen, that many of us do not believe was an actual insurrection. So how do you charge somebody and send them off to prison for decades for something that didn't happen, an event that didn't happen, an event that wasn't even attempted? Were people there to voice their opinions? Were there some actors there who maybe even wanted things to get violent? Sure. But does that mean that they had the intention to incite an insurrection? That is a whole other level of crime in this country, and that is what's in dispute. The release of this 44,000 plus hours of tape will help clarify much of that. When the January 6th committee just cherry picks certain violent scenes and then put that together in a montage to make it look like that was the way the entire event went, that these people showed up with their Trump shirts and MAGA hats and they were out to overthrow the government, they could paint a picture. We've seen propaganda and how it works, how narratives work, and they've certainly been able to gaslight and create a propaganda campaign against there are many people who believe this. But maybe if they see this other footage, they won't. Not as likely. Usually people have their minds made up, and it takes a lot for them to finally say, okay, maybe I was wrong. Usually it has to happen to them in order for them to turn around and say, maybe I was wrong about those other people. So we always have to be careful what we champion against our political enemies, because it will come back to bite us in the ass. Ultimately, it comes back around towards us. So we'll be following, of course, more of this footage as it gets released. I think we'll just see more of the same. We're going to expect to see more of these people that were just in the Capitol gawking and sightseeing and thinking they had every right as Americans to be in a government building that their tax dollars paid for.